My name is Julie Ponesse, and this message is about mandatory vaccinations. I am a professor of ethics at Huron College at the University of Western Ontario. It's one of the largest universities in Canada. Today, I'm going to teach you a short lesson on the universally accepted ethics of coercing people into medical procedures. I'll be the example. My employer has just mandated that I must get a vaccine for COVID-19. If I want to keep working at my job as a professor, I have to take this vaccine. Here's my conundrum. My school employs me to be an authority on the subject of ethics. I hold a PhD in ethics and ancient philosophy. And I'm here to tell you it's ethically wrong to coerce someone to take a vaccine. If it happens to you, you don't have to do it. If you don't want a COVID vaccine, don't take one. End of discussion. It's your own business. But that is not the approach of the University of Western Ontario, which has suddenly required that I be vaccinated immediately or not report for work. So with the school year beginning in a few days, I am facing imminent dismissal after 20 years on the job, because I will not submit to having an experimental vaccine injected into my body. I've had plenty of vaccines in my life, but I've never been forced to take one. It's always been my choice. I don't work in a high-risk environment. I'm not a doctor in an emergency room. I'm a teacher. I'm a university professor. My job is to teach students how to think critically, to ask questions that might expose a false argument. Questions like, says who? Who is the authority giving this order? Should I trust them with control over my body? As a professor, I don't have to watch the news to find out if the COVID vaccines are safe. I read medical journals, and I consult my colleagues who are professors of science and medicine. I've learned from doctors that there are serious questions about how safe these vaccines really are. There are questions about how well they work. Nobody's promising that I won't get COVID or transmit COVID if I get the vaccine. But ultimately, none of that matters to me because I'm a professor of ethics and I'm a Canadian. I'm entitled to make choices about what does and does not enter my body, regardless of my reasons. If I'm allowed back into my university, it's my job to teach my students that this is wrong. I'm hired to teach them that it is ethically wrong to impose an experimental medical procedure as a condition of employment. This is my first and potentially my last lesson of the year. Ethics 101. In the spirit of Socrates, who was executed for asking questions, this lesson will consist of only one question. The answer is multiple choice. Please listen carefully. When a person has done the same job to the satisfaction of her employer for 20 years, is it right or is it wrong to suddenly demand that they submit to an unnecessary medical procedure in order to keep their job? In this case, the procedure is an injection of a substance that has not been fully tested for safety. It has not yet been shown to be effective. It is designed to prevent an illness that poses little threat to the employee. The employee is not allowed to ask questions. She may only submit to the procedure or be fired. To my first year students, is this right or is this wrong? I already know the answer.
That was amazing, Julie.
Sorry. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Julie Ponesse here. It's my absolute pleasure. I'm so honored to be joined by Jordan Peterson today, who I think will have some very interesting insights into the current situation that's happening in Ottawa. Of course, there are a great many things going on today, very scary days. This moment, I think, is electrified. It will be seen as electrifying in human history. There are many things we could talk about, but what's really punctuated today is the situation that's developing by the day, by the hour in Ottawa. So thank you so much, Jordan, for joining us today. And I should say, I think anyone who bothered to click on this interview probably knows who you are already, and you don't need much of an introduction. We could easily give a list of your academic and professional accomplishments. But what I really think of when I think of you are two different things. One is you have brought intellectualism into the public sphere in the best possible way. And secondly, you are, as far as I can tell, unwaveringly and fearlessly dedicated to ideas, to following those ideas to their logical conclusions. I've seen you say on many occasions that I don't know, to apologize when you err. But I think you are unapologetic in your pursuit of the truth and depth and insight, and you are uncancelable, and you are heroic in that. And we need that voice in this very difficult, concerning situation. So I'd like to start there. Let's welcome, thank you for joining us. Let's talk about heroism for a minute. Because the truckers in Ottawa and those supporting them have been called heroes by people supporting them and sort of on the anti-mandate side, but they've also been called things like terrorists on the other side. Which is it, do you think?
Well, I guess we're going to find out as the weeks progress, because it's a constant choice, and it seems to me that the truckers and the protesters that accompany them, by and large, have been making the right choices. The demonstrations have remained peaceful. They're not taking the bait, and we'll see what happens this weekend, because they're going to be increasingly provoked as the political situation becomes increasingly unmanageable for the people who are insisting that the mandates stay in place with no good reason, as far as I can tell. The data seem to be fairly convincing, and I think have been actually for several months, that Omicron is a rather serious flu and no more than that. And the Johns Hopkins study that was released the other day seems to indicate quite clearly that lockdowns didn't have the desired effect on mortality. Now people are criticizing the study and saying, well, that wasn't the only positive effect. It's like, yeah, but you suspended our fundamental civil liberties. So let's go to the hard data, shall we? And we certainly haven't paid the price for the lockdowns yet, not by any stretch of the imagination. So we'll see. I hope the truckers keep their head and maintain peace and civility in the most cautious of manners, because it is a tinderbox. And when you're all sitting inside a tinderbox, it only takes one idiot to light a match. So,
the word hero comes from the Greek for defender or protector, and that is sort of the opposite of a terrorist, isn't it? So it'll be very interesting to see how this goes. I can't get out of my mind. This idea has really gotten a grip on me the last few days, that this trucker convoy is the single most powerful resistance, we might call it, that the Canadian people will be capable of to challenge these mandates.
Yeah, and it's a grassroots thing, which is so interesting watching the NDP react to this. It's so stunning to me that Elon Musk tweets out in favor of the truckers, and Jagmeet Singh, who's an actor unparalleled in his falseness, perhaps only by Trudeau, has so clearly indicated how little he wants to do with the working class. It's something remarkable to behold. And I mean, the truckers aren't making an articulate protest in some sense, right? They're there with their trucks. That's their protest. They're standing their ground. and they've had enough of the assault on our fundamental freedoms, essentially. And it's up to leaders like Trudeau and Singh and the Conservatives to articulate those voices and to bring them forward peacefully and to attend to them instead of demonizing them and then doing these unbelievably appalling maneuvers. First of all, focusing on the Confederate flag. And the mainstream media is absolutely complicit in this. It's like, that is so preposterous that it's so surreal. It's hard to believe it's even true, as if the Confederate flag has anything to do with Canadian history, as if it ever has, as if there's people rallying behind that in some important sense. And the same thing can be said about the single swastika flag, which is one too many, obviously, and the idea that the Terry Fox statue was desecrated compared to, say, what happened to the John A. Macdonald statue. People should have kept their statue. Yeah, absolutely. People should have kept their mitts off the Terry Fox statue, obviously. But I understand the truckers have put guard around it now, and what the legacy media is doing with the trucker protest is beyond reprehensible. I think the most dangerous thing I've seen actually is the political attempts to shut down the GoFundMe funding. That's unparalleled. I think that's an unparalleled act in Canadian history. I truly think that's the worst thing that's happened to us so far.
You were surprised by that?
You know, I'm constantly surprised. I'm not by nature a cynic, you know, really. And I'm not cynical about our public institutions. And generally, although not invariably, I'm not cynical about politicians. But the act of sheer short-sighted, narcissistic, self-righteous idiocy that went into blocking the GoFundMe funding is, I just can't believe that. I cannot believe that our political leadership can be that unconcerned even about their own well-being. What sort of precedent does this set? And it's basically a form of theft, collusion between a fairly large corporate entity, GoFundMe, and the government. It's like collusion between the government and the press, which is almost total now in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, Brian Peckford, who I interviewed on my YouTube channel about a week and a half ago, who is a mainstream political figure and one of the drafters of the Canadian Charter of Rights, like a respectable guy, and was never a radical, relatively well regarded by the left and the right alike in the 1980s, a solid guy, told me flat out that the reason that he announced his legal challenge to the authority of our government on my YouTube channel was because he didn't think that he could get the truth told about what he was doing by any reliable Canadian news outlet. Mm-hmm. And that's just, what do you do when someone like that says something like that to you? It's beyond comprehension.
Well, I was going to ask you, what do you do when you feel that our main media outlets are not accurately reporting the situation? It's interesting because our experiences are very different. You haven't been in Ottawa or in Canada since this started, right? So you have a perspective only that's coming through various kinds of media and other sorts of information sources. I was there Sunday through Tuesday. And I have to say that being there, and I can say I had my young daughter with me out walking on the streets, talking with truckers, and I didn't feel afraid one moment. I didn't see most of the image. Now I'm not, I wasn't every place at every moment, of course, but I did not, what I'm seeing reported, in CTV and Global and CBC, it's like a parallel realities.
It's a planned, no worse than that, it's a planned parallel reality, which is fundamentally equivalent to a totalitarian encroachment. I mean, CBC should be shut down. Canadians should just say enough. There's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for another single dollar of Canadian taxpayer money to go to support that appallingly corrupt, ideologically warped, politically correct, collusionary media source with the federal government. It's inexcusable. And the rest of the media, well, it's part of their pronounced death spiral. You see a little exception to that. The Toronto Sun has had some decent reporting. You see it pop up now and then in the National Post. You see it pop up now and then even in the Globe and Mail. But by and large, it's almost impossible to see what's actually going on in Ottawa. Can't even get a reasonable estimate of the number of people there. And I've also heard, let's say, that this closed circuit cameras that normally monitor the city, which I believe you can get access to by public feed, many of them have been shut off. It's like, now, is that true? Is it not true? I don't know if it's true. It wouldn't surprise me, but it's also, if it is true, it's also, well, it's beyond my capacity to imagine that we're in this situation.
Isn't it all feeling just a bit dystopian to you, or a lot dystopian? That, Friday, the police were talking about doing digital tracking, and now protesting isn't allowed. And the Prime Minister is describing the supporters as championing abuse and racism, and money is, we were talking about GoFundMe, money is being taken.
And sexism and Islamophobia, every bloody playbook in the radical left, in the radical left lexicon. It's like, you dare to drive your trucks to Ottawa to oppose our possibly illegal mandates, probably illegal mandates. What's wrong with you? You must be all of these terrible things. And then let's get the press in on it too. And then, I would hope that the Conservatives, for their part, would stand up in some sort of opposition. But I know full well, because I've talked to people who know, that COVID policy is being governed entirely by public opinion poll, which is a terrible way of sampling public opinion because it's impulsive and narrow, which is why we have a parliamentary system to begin with. We don't have rule by direct democracy because it's foolish. It doesn't allow for any sober second thought, let's say. And so the politicians scare the public, and they do that with the collusion of psychologists and behavioral experts, scare them into compliance. And so then they're all scared, and then they sample public opinion, which is terrified by misinformation, and say, oh, look, people support more mandates, and that scares them further, and away we go. And the Conservatives, for their part, instead of, although Mo and Kenny have taken some more forthright actions in the last week, instead of seizing the moment, which they clearly had in front of them, they just blew their party into fragments, like on the very day they should have been articulating the concerns of the people that they are supposed to represent. And they could have capitalized on that even in the narrow political sense. It's just beyond comprehension.
Let's talk about democracy for a minute. We know that what do you want to say to Canadians now who are having maybe a hard time understanding why the truckers and the people who support them are so committed to this position? What do you want to say to the truckers themselves?
To the truckers, keep your heads, gents. Don't take the bait. What you're doing, producing a community there, cleaning up the streets, trying to care for the homeless, keeping a playful spirit about this, that's crucial. To do it with a sense of play, that's a sign of mastery. It's a very difficult thing to attain. And don't let your frustration translate itself into violence. Be careful, be careful, be careful. There's a lot resting on what you do, right. Every single one of you. Yeah. So eyes open, like ethical stance forward, caution, bravery, truth, care.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Julie Ponesse here. It's my absolute pleasure. I'm so honored to be joined by Jordan Peterson today, who I think will have some very interesting insights into the current situation that's happening in Ottawa. Of course, there are a great many things going on today, very scary days. This moment, I think, is electrified. It will be seen as electrifying in human history. There are many things we could talk about, but what's really punctuated today is the situation that's developing by the day, by the hour in Ottawa. So thank you so much, Jordan, for joining.
About their beliefs. Care for the homeless. Keeping a playful spirit about this, that's crucial. to do it with this, with a sense of play. That's a sign of mastery. It's a very difficult thing to attain. And don't let your frustration translate itself into violence. Be careful, be careful, be careful. There's a lot resting on what you do,
Right.
every single one of you. Yeah. So eyes open, like ethical stance forward, caution